All right, Hillary, here's the word you have to pronounce.
Jornan?
Tjornen.
Tjornen.
Jornan.
Tjornan. TJ. I teach agree.
Jornan.
Welcome, everybody, to Lucky Paper Radio. This is your favorite podcast about Magic the Gathering and Cube and other fun stuff. I am your host, Andy, and I'm here once again with Anthony, who is currently in my home. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Andy. I finally get to go visit a friend's house and no one's here.
Yeah, he's in my home, but I promise we're not violating social distancing guidelines because I am not in my home. I am out of town for 2 weeks. So Anthony is there watching my home and also my bad dog, who everyone heard guest star on the last episode.
You blew up my spot, though. I was ready to blame you every time Sadie barks.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's my fault. But yeah, we'll see if she does any barking. Has she been bad for you?
As long as the mailman's not too close, she's pretty good.
Boy, she really hates the mailman. It's so stereotypical of her. Like it's such a stereotype that the dog hates the mailman, but she really does hate that mailman.
What a cliche.
And Anthony, we are not alone on this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. This is going to be our official, canonical Zendikar Rising episode. We did our little preview when they did the announcement and spoiled a couple cards and mechanics, and we had that sort of show dedicated to some of our early thoughts about the Metal Double Face cards. But this is the one. This is our canonical Zendikar Rising show, and for that we need to bring in some extra help. And we have Jet, a.k.a. Tjornan, TJ Ornan, on the line.
Never really considered how it's supposed to be pronounced. It's a username I made early in my internet career, and I pronounce it Tjornan. But whenever I post in streamers' chats, for example, they always struggle to pronounce it, which I find very funny.
Yeah, for years, I would read that on the Discord, and I was always pronouncing it Tjornan, as if it was some Nordic,
yeah, that's an easy Tjornan for me.
Yeah,
I thought it was Tjornan, but then people will call you TJ, which is much easier. I like TJ, but welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Jet, you actually are the reason that we started Lucky Paper Radio. Now, I actually looked. It's our anniversary, I think, in a couple days of our first launch. So we're almost a year in. And the reason we started this is because you were writing some articles about data analysis as regards to Cube, and we were talking about them just, in chats or whatever. And you had sent me, you had done it in LaTeX, right, which is the academic paper language for writing academic papers for math and science. You had written sort of a Cube article in LaTeX, and we're sending it along for me to read it because you were going to post it on Reddit or something. And I was like, you know what if we made a website for this? Then people could read it without having to crack open a PDF, and that's why Lucky Paper was born. So you're kind of the reason for the season.
Yeah, so does that make me the de facto owner of the website?
Sure, yeah, let's go with that. Yeah, you're the owner of the website every time someone emails me about some problem they have with it. And I'm like, you know what? It's not mine. It's like Mr. Burns and the bird. You're the bird that owns the nuclear power plant.
You could go to jail. And a handsome man like you, I'd hate to think what would happen.
I wouldn't go to jail. The legal owner of this plant would. Canary M. Burns. This entire plant is in his name.
Yeah, I definitely cannot do anything with respect to coding websites, so I'll leave that to you guys.
Yeah, but so anyway, we're excited to have you on the show, and we were going to talk about Zendikar Rising, like I said, and your perspective article, which you've been doing now for every set that has come out in the past, I guess, year, is due out soon, and so we have some of the results of our survey that we have been bugging people to complete that we're going to talk through, and then we're going to talk a little bit about your article that's coming out, and just kind of use that as a way to talk about Zendikar Rising. But first, we are going to do a Pack 1 Pick 1, as we do on the show, of a listener-submitted cube. This week, we are doing the cube of Jonathan Gibson, a.k.a. Angry Gibson on Twitter. And Jonathan has a cube called the Soul Cube, and it's basically, it's a powered cube that aims to play the most powerful cards from Magic's history. And Jonathan has a special attention paid to the most beautiful versions of all of these cards and has a sort of extensively altered and signed cube, which he has lovingly scanned and uploaded to Cube Cobra. So I sent you all a link to this pack we're going to be looking through, and I recommend that all the listeners check the show notes and go check out these beautiful alters and signed cards in Jonathan's cube, because it really is a delight. So the way we're going to do this, I'm just going to read very quickly through all the cards in the pack. We're always trying to refine our pack one, pick one strategy. We talked on the last week's show about how, people complained about how it wasn't the best part of the show. And then, of course, we got a bunch of people that jumped into our comments and said, actually, that was my favorite part of the show, and I hadn't said anything about it. So anyway, we're going to continue to try to improve this segment. And what we're going to do now, I'm just going to read very quickly all of the cards in the pack, and then each of us will just kind of talk about the cards that are in contention for us for a pack one, pick one. So the pack is as follows. Koth of the Hammer, Ponder, Miscalculation, Embrith Shieldbreaker, Hymn to Turok, Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, Anticipate, Robber of the Rich, Fiery Confluence, Woodfall Primus, Birds of Paradise, Ajani Vengeant, Sensei's Divining Top, Mindslaver, and Treachery is the full pack. So, Anthony, I'll throw it to you. What do you think are the cards that are in contention here for your pack one, pick one out of this pack?
But Andy, all the cards are good. What am I supposed to do?
Many of these cards are good. That is the problem. And I will say this is a powered cube, and so immediately I'm just really upset we didn't get any power. There's nothing here that is power or really power adjacent as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's a bit disappointing. I think for me, the number one pick is Birds of Paradise, just because it's very flexible and fits into lots of different decks, and obviously fixes one of the best mana fixing you can get in this cube. What do you think? What's your number one pick?
Well, so the cards in contention for me, I think Birds is up there. I honestly think Ponder, Miscalculation are up there. I think Hymn to Turok is something to be considered potentially, as well as, I gotta say, I think maybe the disciplined pick could be Sensei's Divining Top. Those are kind of all the cards that I'm looking at. Notably, I am not looking at Fiery Confluence and Treachery, which I think are probably two of the most powerful cards in the pack, but both of which are just a little expensive for me to start on. I also have double pips, double red, double blue, respectively. So those are cards I'm not looking to go on out of the gate. Now, Jet, you are notoriously just kind of a mono red drafter, through and through, dyed in the wool. What are you looking at out of this pack?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say you wound me because, Fiery Confluence isn't a big color commitment if you're mono red. So
that is true. It's colorless at that point.
Yeah, and so I actually do think I sort of agree with you in the sense that Ponder and Miscalculation are up there, just cheap, good cards that are efficient. I do personally think that the Fiery Confluence is fairly high if you're trying to spike the cube, because mono red tends to be one of the best strategies. I agree that Treachery is very expensive, but it is also incredibly powerful. So I think sort of my subset of cards I think would be Ponder, Miscalc, Fiery Confluence, and Treachery. I'm not really looking at Sensei's Divining Top. I think that card needs some synergies in a powered cube before it starts to be worth picking.
Yeah, the Treachery here, because I'm seeing cards like Ulamog and Woodfall Primus, I expect there is some mana cheating strategies that are going to put some really stupid big creatures into play, which I think makes Treachery a little more appealing. I have mostly played Treachery in my quote-unquote fair cube, where you're still stealing something. It's still not very nice, but you're not going to get, a Blightsteel Colossus or whatever, where I feel like this environment might have stuff like that in here. So, yeah, I think that's all an argument. So Anthony, are you just still married to his Birds of Paradise then?
I definitely agree with the next couple, like Ponder, Miscalc, and Hymn to Turok are next in power level for me. Between all of the mono red cards, I'm actually not sure. That seems like a totally viable way to start the draft. I'm actually not sure between those. If I wanted to draft mono red, I would take. I think Koth is also quite a strong card at 4 mana. But if I'm honest with myself, if I was sitting down at the table, it would be hard for me to take a Ponder over a Bird.
Yeah, Bird is nice. It's true. I generated a couple packs. I'll be honest. I played the numbers a little bit on this one because I didn't want to just open a pack where we all took Mana Crypt or whatever. So I think his pack is a difficult pick. At the end of the day, it's really tough. I don't know. I do think top is in consideration here, and part of the thing is that none of these cards are. We're looking at again a powered cube, so there's probably stuff like Time Walk and Ancestral Recall in here. There's plenty of cards I will happily commit to a color or a direction for. I'm just not sure if Ponder, Birds of Paradise, Fiery Confluence, Treachery are good enough to make me do that, and so top is kind of a free roll to go to the second pack and take something, but. I don't know. I think it would probably be Ponder if I am trying to put myself at the table. Imagine I open this pack and I only have 60 seconds to make my decision. I'm probably going to take Ponder out of this pack, I think.
Yeah, I think for me when it comes down to it, it's between Ponder and Fiery Confluence. I think if I was feeling my mono red inclinations, as I often am, I would probably take Fiery Confluence.
If it was a day ending in Y, I might
Yeah.
maybe consider drafting mono red.
Exactly. But I think that the second close pick is Ponder, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good cards here, but nothing that is head and shoulders above the rest, which is what I really want to see when I open a pack from a powered cube. Yeah, I think this is a tough pick. I am not confident about the direction chosen here. Honestly, I feel like between these like 4 or 5 cards we've been talking about, you can't really go wrong. You know, there's not a huge power differential between any of these cards, so it's kind of just what you're feeling. Sometime, Anthony, I want to talk on the show about the idea of a flat power level, which I feel like is an ideal that a lot of people seek in their cube design, but if you really achieve a truly flat power level, then all of your pack one pick ones end up being packs like this, where you're like, well, all these cards are very good, none of them are excellent, and it's kind of just whatever I feel like drafting. And I don't know, I feel like I originally started cube design thinking I wanted to aim for a flat power level, and then it kind of soon learned, actually, you know what, I like a little bit more variation in the power level, so there's something pulling you one direction or another.
Definitely. I don't think that necessarily a flat power level is a great goal, but I think it does sort of become a result of a lot of other goals you can have for the cube. And I mean, like you're saying, the fact that you can kind of follow your own direction, what interests you in any given draft is kind of a fun experience.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes people say flat power level, and they mean just relative to a normal set, right? Like the difference between Glorybringer and Hedron alignment is, it's not, you can't even compare the cards. And so, you know, relatively, we're talking about like cutting off the really, really low lows and the really, really high highs for most cubes. But maybe that's a topic for another time. We can dive into that more deeply. All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for sending us your cube. Again, this is a beautiful altered cube with lots of great foils and, you know, cool hand-altered cards and signatures. So I do recommend people go check that out and just check it out on Cube Cobra. We'll put the link in the show notes. And if you want to have your cube on Lucky Paper Radio, you can mail it to mail@luckypaper.co. I mean, email, I guess. Who says mail? You can send us an email at mail@luckypaper.co with a link to your cube, your name, your pronouns, how you want to be credited, and we will check it out and do it on the show. Got through that quickly because we have a lot to talk about on this show. We are going through Zendikar Rising now and just kind of reviewing the results of our survey. So we actually haven't, the podcast is newer than our most recent survey. We kind of started the show right after the M21 survey closed. We put the article out, but we didn't really talk about it on the show. So Jed, this is a series of your design. I was wondering if you could basically just introduce listeners who maybe are not familiar with our perspectives with what we do.
Yeah, sure. So these surveys are basically designed to assess what the cube community thinks of cards from new sets. I think we had the idea to start them when we were sort of talking about what Lucky Paper should look like and thinking about data and statistics related to cube. And one of the things that I think I have always wanted is just sort of an assessment of community opinions, because I think the cube community is so defined by the different communities that exist online and, you know, even communities that exist offline, right? Because the online community doesn't necessarily represent what cube looks like generally. And so I think this survey was sort of an attempt to, I don't know, just sort of summarize what the community thinks. And that was sort of the goal. And so the way that it works is we make a survey and then we send it out to interested people that want to fill it out. And so we post on various Discord servers. We post on online forums. So the Cube subreddit. We post on MTG Salvation, which is a popular Cube site. You know, Riptide Labs, which is another Cube forum. And so the idea is just to get as many responses as possible. And the way that the Cube survey is actually set up is that each person creates a list of cards that they are thinking about testing for the new set. And then they rank each card on a scale of 1 to 3. And so the way that the scale works is that 1 refers to sort of your low-grade cards that you're testing but that you don't think will make the cut long-term in your cube. So these are kind of the Hail Marys of the set for you. Rank 2 refers to cards you believe could have staying power in your cube but definitely aren't slam dunks, right? So you might test them and you might cut them after some time, or they might do better than you thought they would, and then they stay in. And then rank 3 is the windmill slam dunks of the set, the cards that you think will be staples in your cube for years. And so each person gives a ranking to each card on a scale of 1 to 3. It can be like 1.5, 1.6, whatever. And then we sort of summarize that. We also get from the users what type of cube they have. which I think is useful for thinking about the way that different cubes are thinking about these cards. And then we summarize the cards, right? So each card sort of gets an average ranking from the community. And then we also try to evaluate what cards are contentious. And we do that by looking at the standard deviation of the different rankings. And so the standard deviation refers to how much people disagree on their rankings. So if one card has a lot of ones and a lot of threes, that card has a very high standard deviation, and we think of that card as fairly contentious because some users are rating it as a 3, a staple, and then other users are rating it as a 1. And so we also come up with a sort of consensus ranking for that.
Yeah, and we've been doing this now for, I guess, about a year. Our first set was Throne of Eldraine, right? Is that the one we did first?
I think so. Yeah, that was Throne of Eldraine. That was an interesting one because that one had a lot of good cards in it.
Yeah, it turned out that we started on a really high note because that was a set that ended up being really great for many cube designers. And then, other sets that followed, we were like, we're not getting as many responses on our survey, or people aren't testing as many cards. Like, what's changed? And it's just that actually that set was very good. Yeah, so I am proud of this sort of series we put together. I think it's really informative and well done. And I'll say, too, I think of it as kind of, we were talking about how lots of cube content creators or cube websites will do like their set review whenever a set comes out, and to me the perspectives kind of came up when we were talking about like what is our set review, right? Like, are we going to do a subjective set review like everyone else does, or are we going to do something else? And we felt like there's no shortage of here's an individual cube designer with their philosophy on the game, their take, and they can write their results up and what they think the cards are going to perform like, and that's their kind of subjective set review. For us, it was like, what's something different and more unique that we can do? And, really we, again, kind of just like surveying the whole community, because as you kind of alluded to, Jet, I feel like there are these little enclaves of cube designers in different communities and places that oftentimes will have a particular ideology that is sometimes hard to articulate, but permeates through the community, right? Like a certain Discord server, or Riptide Labs versus MTG Salvation, or the prevailing kind of cube that show up on like the main subreddit. Like all these different places, there's different like subjective leanings and like sort of tastes and values for how they design a cube. And so I was interested in like getting a little bit out of our little bubble, like of the places where we spend the most time online, and talking about the format, and just really getting a sense for like what are cube designers as a whole looking at from a set, and how are they rating those things. I also think there's Anthony, I wanted to give you a chance to share what I think is your like brilliant little hack for Scryfall. You often sort by a weird metric when you are looking for cards on Scryfall. Do you want to tell people what you do in that sort of?
Sure. So, I mean, as somebody designing like mostly a lower powered cube, it's not quite as useful just to look at like what are the rares in the set, or some other metric like that. And I'll end up doing a lot of like very detailed searches on Scryfall where I'm looking for every card that fits some certain mechanical theme. And I found it's actually really useful just to, even though there's no sort by cube rankings, there is a sort by commander rankings, specifically by EDHREC. And even though like the cards that are most relevant in Commander are not going to be the most relevant in my cube, it just means that like the bottom, third to a 2/3 of the cards that come back in the search are just like the real like draft chaff, or cards that are like old and don't really make sense. And the fact that there's enough overlap between these formats that the really, really unplayable cards fall to the bottom just means you have a little bit less processing to do when you can just look at that first chunk of the cards.
Right, and the thing that's really fascinating to me about that metric specifically is that is, as far as I know, the only metric available on Scryfall that is like a crowdsourced, like subjective metric. It is not, an actual like black and white hard thing that's just written on the card that there's no like argument about. It's just, this is actually from people that have put cards on EDH deck lists on the sites that EDHREC scrapes to sort of build their database of popular EDH cards. And so you're actually like getting some human filtering, which means that some functional duplicate card is going to be just ignored because that card already existed in somewhere else. And you end up filtering out a lot of things you can't otherwise filter out just mechanically with the actual things that are on the card. So in some ways, I also see this perspective as something like that, where we can take a new set, and for somebody that's maybe not as invested in cube design as the three of us are, as the people that are filling out our survey are, they might come to Cube in a year and say like, oh, I have this old cube, I'm going to update it, like what are the cards that are interesting, and we can basically give them, kind of a short list of, well, there's 400 cards in every set, and if you want to go look at all of them, you can. But if you don't, here's a list of just, a rough ranking based on, again, some subjective human opinions of what cards are most powerful or interesting or, relevant for their environments that might give you some sort of shape and sort of make your search a little bit quicker because you can kind of look at those things. And I should say, too, what I'm explicitly not interested in doing, and I think we're all on the same page about this, is like trying to objectively define the quote unquote like best cube cards, right? Like we've talked a lot about how there is a leaning in the cube design community towards a, legacy or vintage, like, powerful cube, where you're playing the most powerful, like, best cards from Magic's history based on however you define best cards. And I don't want to just basically try and present some objective fact of what those best cards are from every set, because I think that's misguided and doesn't encapsulate all of the great things that cube design can be, and is very like diminishing to what the format can be. So really, I want this to be a big tent where we're showing as many cards as we can that are interesting to people and putting them in an order so people get a sense of roughly how many other cube designers out there are interested in these cards for whatever reasons they're interested in them. But yeah, I don't want to try and define what the best cards are by any stretch.
I also don't think that so I agree with your point, Andy, that I don't think it's useful to show the most powerful cards, and isn't our goal. But I also don't think the survey is designed to do that at all, because the rankings that people give from 1 to 3 are entirely subjective. So for example, I might see a really powerful card like Oko, Thief of Crowns, right? And I say, wow, this card is a cube staple. I'm going to give it a 3 because I'm interested in optimizing power level in my cube, and it's going to be here forever. Someone else might see Oko and they say, I hate the play patterns that go along with this card, right? I'll test it to see if it is as oppressive as it looks. And if it is, then I'll cut it from my cube, right? And so they might give Oko a 1.5 because they might end up removing it from their cube. And so I do think that these rankings themselves often correlate with power level, because I think most of the users that we survey are interested in sort of pushing the power level boundaries of their cubes. But it's definitely not exact. So I don't think it really encapsulates that power level,
right,
like people might think it would.
Yeah, I think these rankings are really just more of a shortcut. If you're looking at maybe adding some cards from the set from your cube and you don't want to look at every single card, if you just want to look at the top 20 cards people are ranking, you're going to get a pretty good picture of what might be relevant to you.
Even though I disagree with all these people we survey quite often.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things, right? I often look at these results and I say, the cube community likes that card? Like, that card wasn't even on my radar. And that's really useful,
this wouldn't be fun if it was just everything you expected.
That's true.
So let's dive into the results. So Jet, you have sort of spent the most time with this data. Anthony and I have looked at the results a little bit too, but we haven't actually read any of your writing about it yet. So I'm curious if you want to just kind of like summarize things, or what the most surprising things were for you about the results of this survey.
Yeah, I think I'll start off by saying, the survey was open for I think a little over a week at this point. The survey itself is broken into a few different kinds of cubes, mostly restricting by rarity. And so we have 14 peasant cubes that ended up being surveyed, and so these are common and uncommon cubes, 10 pauper cubes, and then 171 cubes that we call unrestricted. Now, people might classify their cubes as unrestricted, and I think we had about 150 people that classified their own cubes as unrestricted in terms of rarity. And so these range from modern power level cubes all the way up to legacy unpowered or then power cubes. And then there's also sort of a smaller group there that has like specialized cubes. So we have like a 1-drop cube, for example, in here. We have EDH cubes, multiplayer cubes. And at least for the purposes of summarizing the cards themselves, we group those all into unrestricted cubes. But just keep in mind that the unrestricted category, which is probably what we'll talk about most, isn't necessarily just, your powered, unpowered level cubes.
We had a tough decision to make, I think, with how we collected that data, because we wanted to provide useful buckets if we could. And, obviously, like, it's possible for a card to be a fantastic card for pauper cubers out there and not really make a dent in the overall rankings if we just kind of lumped everything together. Because the fact of the matter is, at least with the audience we're sort of reaching, we're getting much fewer responses for rarity restricted cubes than we are for just sort of completely wide open, do whatever you want cubes. So we kind of decided to do that. Other options we had were like, we could have binned it by legality. We could have said like legacy cubes, modern cubes, vintage cubes, or whatever. But the reality of that is that, the difference in those formats is not in the cards that are being played from the new sets that are coming out. It's in cards that are being played from the very oldest sets. The difference between vintage and legacy cubes is most of the time just the actual power, and occasionally a card like paradoxical outcome might, show up from a new set as a vintage cube staple, but not necessarily as a legacy cube staple. But really, it's like there's a ton of overlap in what modern cube designers and legacy cube designers and vintage cube designers are testing out of a new set. So really, we decided to break it up this way, and that means we have a big tent for unrestricted. It kind of contains a bunch of things, and I like that fact of it. And it is I think a little bit unfortunate that everybody has their own unique cube with their own unique design philosophy, whether it's something specifically articulated like just one drops or just characters that are sitting in chairs, or whether it's more subtle, it's their particular value set as they approach the game, even though they're playing a quote unquote just unpowered cube. And obviously we can't. It's a little bit of a shame that we can't offer more insight into like the variety inside of that big bucket, but we can't do everything with this sort of series, and I think what we're doing here works for our goals. So
I don't know how you can call that unfortunate, though. The diversity of like so many different cubes with different goals is what's amazing about the format.
Right. What I mean is that I almost wish we could have a density of information here so that people could have more insight into like what all of these like other like different kind of restricted cubes are, and that kind of gets lost by just bidding it all as unrestricted. But that's the kind of information that I'm happy that I think is better articulated through articles highlighting an environment, or a podcast where we talk about a sort of cube with a different design restriction or stipulation, rather than a aggregated data analysis like this. So just sort of a note that those things are, I think, a little bit buried here, but just by necessity of the kind of work we're doing to correlate and sort of collate all this data.
Yeah, I think cube ends up being a continuum, right? And we're arbitrarily placing boundaries by collapsing all of these cubes into unrestricted. And I think that does the variety of the format a little bit of a disservice, but I think it's something we end up having to do.
Yeah, if we didn't do it, we couldn't make these graphs and do any of the work we're doing. So we're kind of collapsing those things to a necessary end to help kind of hopefully communicate something interesting about how cube designers are processing new cards. Let's just start at the top. I mean, what are the cards that people are most excited about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I noticed in doing a lot of these surveys that the cards so I guess there's two ways of looking at that, right? So there's one way, which is what are the cards that the most people are testing, right? And so this is like a pure numbers game, 100 out of 171 unrestricted cubes are testing this card. But then there's also the categorization of what's the highest rated card, right? And we apply a cutoff to the data, so we only look at cards, above a certain threshold of number of testers. So, if one person tests a card and they give it a 3, it doesn't end up being the highest of our rankings. But one thing that I've noticed in doing a lot of these set surveys is that the cards that rank highest are often the ones that, rank highest in terms of the number of people testing them, are often not the ones that sort of push the boundaries of Magic rules. And what I mean by that is they often don't use the set's marquee mechanics. And so I think for this set, the cards that end up having the most number of people testing them are sort of your more traditional cards that could slot into any number of cubes, right? So for example, the card that has the most number of people testing it is Luminarch Aspirant, which is the 1 and a white card for a 1/1 that at the beginning of combat puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature. And 63% of our unrestricted cubers are testing this card. And it gets a rating of about 2.3, which means that it's probably going to stay in some number of cubes, and then we'll probably get cut from some number of cubes. And so I think that that's probably not the most powerful card in the set, but it just sort of is the most classic, I guess, in some sense. And so a lot of people will test this card because they have +1/+1 counter, synergies in their cubes. It's a perfectly fine white weenie card. And so it ends up having a lot of testers.
You mentioned that oftentimes the flagship mechanic or the most kind of interesting and like novel cards of the set don't score super highly in the survey. And I think there's another reason for that, which is that we don't know how to evaluate them. I think, they're some of the cards that we have the least amount of precedent for understanding how effective they may or may not be, which means that when people are looking at the set and they haven't played the cards yet and they're trying to decide which ones they think are interesting, there's a lot of maybe skepticism or sort of just lack of certainty around how good those cards might actually be, because we don't know. We've never played with modal double face cards before, for example.
Yeah, I think like one particular great example of that is when we did the Ikoria survey, right? A lot of people were pretty low on the companion cards because they weren't sure how they were going to play. And then, they ended up being absolute monsters.
But that was a perfect example of a situation where we don't really know for sure that people were low in them for that reason. It might have been that lots of people perceived them as being super broken and just weren't going to play them because they were too broken, right? And so that's a good example of the Ikoria perspective. Definitely, it has one of the biggest deviations between what I believe to be the raw power level of the cards and how they ranked in our survey, because these 10 cards that kind of fundamentally, at least until the rules changed, just were broken in this way that was hard to deny in this particular environment. They scored all over the place because people, I think, some people were playing them because they were good, some people were not playing them because they were too good, some people thought they were just bad, and it was just it resulted in a big sort of hodgepodge of rankings for those companions.
Do you think it's also fair to say that a lot of the marquee mechanics are often either somewhat parasitic when you're trying to put them into a singleton environment, so that they just don't end up getting tested for that reason?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of the marquee mechanics are not necessarily what people are sort of interested in with respect to cubes. And so, for example, for Zendikar Rising, there are a fair number of people that just don't like the double face cards for a variety of different reasons. And so I think they end up not testing them. And so I think your more classic cards that will slot into a variety of different archetypes and tend to fit cube goals will end up being tested by more people.
Yeah, I was really shocked to see Luminarch Aspirant so high on the list. It really doesn't stand out as the card that's going to be so exciting to any particular designer. But I mean, with that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. It's just going to be pretty good in a lot of different contexts.
I gotta say, the thing most surprising for me about this, and this highlights where my perceptions of a set really deviate from what apparently are the popular perceptions of a set, is I totally expected at least the mythic modal double face cards to be 4 quadrant hits, just slam dunks for so many people for a couple of reasons. One is I think they are extraordinarily powerful, and I also think they're really, really, really exciting. I expected people that were maybe not just making power optimized cubes, but liked big, splashy, powerful cards that did really weird things, would also really like these cards, because now you get to play, a 7-mana sorcery that makes 2 angels, or you get to play some giant reanimation spell in your whatever deck. And I was surprised that, the mythic cards did rank pretty highly in terms of the raw number of testers, but, the highest one is Amiria's Call, which is the white one, which has 79 testers, which is, not as many as the most ones. And then, they're below a fair number of cards in the set that are otherwise just like you said, Jet, kind of bread and butter cards. And I'm still, honestly, as I sit here, a little surprised that more people aren't excited about these cards.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, well, it's a variety of different things. I think there are a subset of people that just genuinely believe that modal double face cards aren't as good as people think they are, right? But there's also a subset of people, and I partially consider myself among these, which is that they don't like the freeness of the cards, right? Amiria's Call is so free to play. You'll play it in literally any white deck. And so it ends up being not that interesting of a draft pick decision, depending on the power level of your cube. And so I think that is maybe another reason that people don't necessarily like them.
I want to explore this a little bit, because I've heard people say something like this in most of the Discord servers, on Reddit and stuff. And I'm a little bit... I don't quite understand the distinction between a card that is, free to play, offers no interesting draft decisions, and a card that is just flexible and good, right? Every red deck will play Lightning Bolt. I have never heard anybody say, Lightning Bolt sucks because it's just this boring, free pick that, doesn't change your draft decisions or anything. I feel like I always hear people excited about oh, great, here's a card that will allow my drafters to stay open and, commit to a color, but not a particular, speed or archetype within that color. So for you, what is the distinction between these modal double face cards and stuff like Ponder or Lightning Bolt or Llanowar Elf or whatever kind of the generic playable, flexible cards are in existing colors?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of another class of cards that are free are just the ones that are incredibly powerful, right? So my cube also includes Mana Drain and Mind Twist, which, you might view as extraordinarily free because, you'll just take them and they'll sort of dictate how your draft goes. I definitely don't claim to be consistent in this aspect. I cube those cards and I like cubing those cards. I think part of the reason is that these cards are so free, but also their effects just might not show up in the game, right? If you draw a Ponder, Like you will always cast your Ponder and it'll like make interesting choices for you. But if you draw like Amiria's Call early, like it's always going to be a land for you. And then if you draw Amiria's Call late, it's always going to be, 7 mana for 2 4/4s, which is like great. But I think that dichotomy sort of ends up to being relatively straightforward gameplay, which I think to me is another reason why I don't particularly like them. I say that I'm cubing all 4 of all the good ones, and I'm like super excited to do that. But
ooh, all the good ones.
Like,
someone's getting sassy already.
Well,
I think there's a pretty clear delineation. I mean, we're saying people are low on these cards, but 4 of them are still in the top dozen.
Absolutely.
It's really just the blue one that falls
they,
short.
They are well among the highest rated cards in the set. They're just not like 3 steps above like Andy might think they should be.
Yeah, I just didn't expect them to be below Luminarch Aspirant and Kargan Intimidator and, have Nighthawk Scavenger be kind of splitting them up in the sort of ranking list. I really thought they would be top of the tier. And, because we've had surveys where, cards were people were just thrilled about them, kind of across the board. And we have to be careful here because our audience has gotten larger since we started running the surveys. And I think by definition, that means we're also reaching a broader audience, not just larger and getting bigger in all the same ways, but also larger in that we're reaching people that are further from maybe our own value sets and our own communities that are doing cube design. But to go back to Eldraine, cards like Bone Crusher Giant and Murderous Rider just had through the roof, percentages of people testing them and through the roof rankings. Everyone was like these cards. And that was an example of like the adventure mechanic was a new mechanic. It was novel. It was potentially could suffer from all the things that, the mutate cards or the companion cards could have suffered from that we mentioned. But, those cards were just, everyone was thrilled about them. And so I keep kind of looking at sets, and here was like, other sets we've done in the past, I did not think the companions would be through the roof like that for all the reasons we talked about. And like, in the core set 2020 or 2021 or whatever, I didn't look at any of those cards and think, wow, some of these are going to be like slam dunks. I really did think that more of these were going to be just more of these mythic, specifically Mortal Double Face cards were going to be slam dunks. And they're up there. They're highly rated. They're among the best cards of a set according to our surveyed participants. But yeah, they definitely were not head and shoulders above the rest like I anticipated it might be. And
I think we'll talk more specifically about the mythic Modal Double Face cards and the non-mythic ones as well. But I also want to briefly touch on sort of the cluster of cards that I referred to earlier, which are like the classic cube cards, right? So Luminarch Aspirant is the one that is being tested by the most number of people, by 63% of unrestricted cubers. The highest rated card in the set is actually sort of another one of these cards, and it's Thieving Skydiver, right? So this is the 1 and a blue for the 2/1 flyer that has kicker X, and then when it comes into play, you steal an artifact with converted mana cost X or less. And that's the highest rated card in the set with a rating of 2.5. And this honestly kind of blew me away. There are about 50% of people are testing this, so it's being tested by a fewer number relative to like Luminarch Aspirant. But the people that are testing it are rating it super highly. And that kind of blew me away. Like, this was not a card that was super on my radar, but it seems like a lot of people are excited about it.
So my hypothesis is just that it's a pretty polarizing card in that it's extremely effective, especially in powered cubes where you have a lot of cheap artifacts. But in cubes that don't have those kinds of features, it kind of doesn't do that much. Does that seem like a reasonable hypothesis?
Well, if it doesn't do that much, why would it be ranked so highly, though?
Because the people that are testing it are thinking it's really, really effective in that context.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
So I think the minority of our respondents are actually playing powered cubes. I think the vast majority are playing some version of unpowered, but otherwise vaguely power optimized environments. So I don't think this has an 89 testers to the rank of 2.5 because of how good it is at stealing a Moxen or whatever. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Sure, I mean, even stealing Signets and Mindstones is pretty effective.
No, that is what I think it is. I think it's in here because people are excited about it for that reason. I don't know. It's worth noting that like a rank of 2.5 is not super high. Again, looking at sort of past surveys, we have had cards that ranked much higher. More recently, with again more respondents, like Heartless Act, I think ranked significantly higher because that's just a very clean removal spell that pretty much everyone agrees. Like, yeah, that's a very good Doomblade variant. We're going to play it. Here, yeah, this card is weirder and more novel than I would expect to rank the highest in the set. But I guess we are, I was surprised, honestly. I kind of compare the new black removal spell, which I will get the name of here very shortly, Blood Chief's Thirst. That, to me, I compared to something like a Heartless Act and maybe expected to score more highly, but that's just a little bit below the Thieving Skydiver at 2.3 of an overall rating. So, Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I can't quite entirely account for why Thieving Skydiver is so highly ranked.
Yeah, I do think it on some level it is the idea of stealing signets, and then also there are some cheap artifacts that are like extraordinarily important in unpowered cubes, like Skull Clamp, as an example.
Yeah, I mean you're also going to steal a 7/7 Stonecoil Serpent for a mana, which is going to feel pretty good.
Yeah, I think it is also like because it is scalable, right? Like turn 8 you might steal a Worm Coil, and like that's just going to end the game on the spot.
All right, what are some of these other cards then in this generic section up here?
Yeah, and so this is one that I think Andy mentioned earlier, which is Kargan Intimidator, right? So this is like the marquee red aggro 2-drop of the set. I think it's a warrior, and then it says cowards can't block warriors, kind of the meme related to that, and then has a bunch of activated abilities that prevent cowards from blocking warriors, or pumps it by +1/+1, or gives it trample. And this is being tested by 56% of unrestricted cubers, and has a rating of 2.3, which is right around Luminarch Aspirant. I think I kind of expected this. This is like sort of the marquee red aggro 2-drop that some number of people are testing. But I will also say that this slot is getting very contentious. Like, I was looking at in my own cube for cuts for this card, and it was really difficult, actually. Like, I think if you gave this card to me like a year ago, or like a little 2 years ago, it would have just been a windmill slam dunk, right? And so I think it's interesting that slot is getting more competitive. Like, I ended up cutting Robber of the Rich for it, which I'm not actually sure is correct.
Yeah, that is a card I expected to be... That kind of came in about what I expected in terms of rank and percentage of testers. The thing I get surprised by, again, is just that it wasn't well below all of the modal double face cards, and instead was above them all.
Well, but it also appeals to different kinds of players that, extreme power and consistency is not what they're going for, but cowards can't block warriors really, really resonates with them.
Yeah, but it's also extremely powerful and consistent, which means that you're going to have that sort of stuck in there. I played a little bit with this card in Sealed and was just very impressed by it. I think it's very effective.
Yeah, I think it also demonstrates, remember, the distinction between the number of people testing it and its actual ranking, right? Like 56% of people are testing it, which is pretty high relative to the double face cards, but it does actually rank lower than the mythic double face cards at like 2.3. Whereas most of the mythic ones are 2.4 or plus, which is not a huge difference, but it's not head and shoulders above them.
One thing that I thought was very interesting, which I think kind of touches on this issue of the modal double face cards, is that if you take into account our threshold, which I think is set to 5 cubers right now, so we're basically ignoring anything below 5 people that are testing it, the third highest ranked card in the entire set is Bayeen Veil, which is the blue modal double face card that on the front side is a instant that gives creatures your opponents control -2/-0 till end of turn, with a ranking of 2.5, right up there with Thieving Skydiver. But it's only being tested by 6 of all of the testers, of which 171 you said were the number of testers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's only being tested by 6 of the 171 people, and yet it ranks super highly. And this, to me, I think is a very good case study for the subset of cube designers that are convinced that modal double face cards are kind of broken. Like, they're so good that they're kind of all playable in a certain way. And what we're seeing here basically is that only a small number of people are testing them, but they rank them super highly. And what I would expect is everyone that is testing Bayeen Veil and rated it a 2.5 or a 3 or whatever also rated almost every other modal double face card a 2.5 or a 3, and their sort of high rating is getting more absorbed into the average of other people that are also considering testing those cards. Whereas down here, people that are not very high on the modal double face cards are not touching Bayeen Veil, but it's only the people that are like really high on the mechanic that are accounting for that high ranking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the interesting things that always comes about in this survey is that we do see some of the different thoughts of cube design come up in cards that are being tested by only a few number of people but have incredibly high ratings. And so these tend to be the subset of cubers that are interested in minimizing redundancy. And so a lot of times you'll get cards that more expensive cantrips, right? There's like a subset of the community that loves more expensive, it's not even more expensive cantrips, so like the 2 mana and 1 mana cantrips that normal people, normal is definitely the incorrect word to use there. I'm pushing my own agenda there.
Opinion.
Yeah. That's sort of like what the traditional cube design principles are not necessarily geared towards, right? And so those cards will test very highly, but are only being tested by a subset, like Bane and Veil in this case.
Yeah, a good example here for just that exact thing you described is Deliberate is in this set, which is 2 mana Preordain at instant speed. And, that's a card that I think most people, according to this data at least, are not interested in looking at, 2 mana versions of cards that already exist at 1 mana just for instant speed. But there are a subset of cube designers that really want just redundancy in all of their effects so that you can draft a very consistent deck and you can very reliably get effects you're looking for. And so for them, this has a rating of 2.2. So, that's a good example of different sort of ideologies of different cube design communities and philosophies do kind of rise up when you start to sort these things by different values.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lithiform Engine also really stands out to me. I think it appeals to a very, very different group of people, but similarly, a small group of people are going to be very excited about this card, and it's very, very close to the top of the rankings, with only seven players testing it.
Yeah, this is that 4-mana artifact that has a bunch of abilities where you can copy activated abilities or instant or sorcery spells or permanents, and it's very mana-intensive and very slow, but has a lot of weird story potential, I think is what I would say. And so I would expect a lot of those people are perhaps multiplayer cubes where speed is not as important as doing something broken because you're, have 3 opponents instead of 1. Or people that are building cubes that are focused on combos or novel card interactions. And this card has a lot of potential for weird combinations with other cards that would make it very appealing to people that are designing cubes based on that principle.
Yeah, I think the idea of story equity cards ranking high for a subset of cubers and not that high for others is definitely a defining feature of this survey. Sort of in keeping with the discussion about these more traditional cube cards, the last two I think that are being tested by a lot of cubers that rank fairly highly are Skyclave Shade and Bloodchief's Thirst. So Skyclave Shade is like the Bloodghast-esque card of this set, and it's being tested by 57% of unrestricted cubers, and it ranks fairly well at 2.3. And I think a lot of people are excited for this card. I think this is an example of a card that a lot of people are testing because they're interested in synergies with it, right? So it works very well in aristocrat style decks, and a lot of people are interested in pushing those, and so it ends up being tested by a lot of cubers.
Right. I was going to say this to me reads as a purely black aggro card because I don't support something like aristocrats. And so when I first saw it, I was a little bit like, oh man, I didn't think that many people really supported black aggro in their cubes. And I'm kind of surprised to see it rank so highly. But then I, of course, remembered that if you are building a more archetypal cube, this might not be an aggro card. It might be a landfall card, or it might be a aristocrats card, or it might be, some other kind of synergy that you're drawn to, not just, a package of very aggressive black 2-drops that can make an aggressive deck.
Yeah, I think cards that tend to split that, being both great for cubes that are interested in optimizing power level, like this card, it's great in an aggro deck, but then also having archetype-related synergies tend to do very well in terms of the number of people testing it. And then also, Bloodchief's Thirst, right? So I think this card is kind of surprising to me. I definitely rated it lower than I think a lot of the cube community, and then I ended up having it played against me, a few days ago, and my impression of it shot up significantly because it ended up I was playing mono red naturally, and
Natch.
It removed my 1-drop on turn 1, and then I was like, I can no longer win the game. And then in another game.
Cool mono red deck that folds to disfigure, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. As a mono red player, you learn to roll with those punches. And then in another game, it removed my Chandra, and I was like, well, I can no longer win the game. It's a card that I think...
Get you a man that can do both.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I should build my mono red decks better. It turns out I might not actually be good at building mono red. But anyway, so I think Bloodchief's Thirst is really interesting to me, and it's only being tested by 44% of cubers, which is lower than all of the cards we have just been talking about. But its rating tends to be pretty high at 2.3, and I think it's an example of a card that a lot of people are interested in for maximizing removal redundancy, right? So there's a subset of the cube community that will play every Doomblade that they can get their hands on. I'm not sure if you're in that camp, Andy. I know you like to play a lot of removal.
I am kind of in that camp, with the exception that I strongly avoid any kind of card that is a functional duplicate of another card, and so I want all of the actually different removal spells I can get, but I'm not going to jam Doomblade and Terror, for example. Terror is not getting anywhere near my cube because it's just the worst Doomblade. And so I was thrilled about Bloodchief's Thirst. This is, I think, maybe the only non-mythic modal double face card that I ranked a 3, if I remember correctly. But this to me feels like just an incredible removal spell that does everything you want early, and then I'm very happy to have a 4-mana Hero's Downfall later at sorcery speed. Like, that's not a problem for me at all if I can also have it be a Disfigure early on or a Fatal Push early on or whatever. So yeah, I thought this card was really good. And this was another card I was a little surprised to see so low. I think as much as we kind of harp on it on the show and I hear it talked about in cube design circles, I still think in the broad cube design world, it's hard to evaluate modal cards accurately at first blush, because it's very hard to look at this and not think, geez, this is just a worse Fatal Push or a worse Hero's Downfall, and both those cards are fine in my cube. Like, why would I want to play a worse version of it? And the real value is that it's both, right? And the fact that it's both means that it can do those two things you mentioned. It can kill your 1-drop on turn 1, which really stifles your starters in aggro deck, or maybe you get to the late game and you're trying to close things out with the Chandra Torch of Defiance, and now it stops that too. And there's a huge amount of value in that modality. And so I think it's just one of the better removal spells we've seen in, a very long time, and I think it's going to be my cube for a very long time.
Yeah, it definitely ended up impressing me over the weekend, and so I think if I were to refill out this survey, I would give it a higher ranking.
Did you end up adjusting your ranking like you said you might?
No, I decided to be true, so I said to myself, maybe I can just adjust my ranking in sort of the back end. But I decided to be true to the idea of the survey, right? Which is that you test cards before you end up getting to play them, and like what your initial impressions are. So I didn't.
I appreciate your academic integrity. You will. No one's going to listen to this and get you disbarred from whatever future, academic circles you're in. But I think that it's a good example of. Modal cards are harder to evaluate. I always see them showing up lower on people's evaluations of how good they are than I think they actually are. Which maybe I'm too high on them. It's possible.
And then I think there's sort of another group of cards that are sort of more traditional cube cards. So we'll talk about the modal double face cards in a second, which are their own interesting beast. But there's a subset of cards that are being tested by fewer cubers, but still have sort of an average ranking, which are sort of traditional cube cards. The first is that I want to talk about is Null Priest of Oblivion. Like I remember when this card was spoiled, I read it and I was like, oh, I guess that's kind of interesting. But I was surprised to see so many people cubing it. 51% of unrestricted cubers are testing this card. It has a little bit of a lower ranking than some of the cards we talked about earlier. It has a rating of 2.1. But this is the one in the black for Menace Lifelink 2/1, and then you can kick it for 4 extra, and then you get a reanimate effect. I personally am not super interested in this card because I think 6 mana is a lot for a reanimation effect, and the floor is not that high. I guess like good in an aggressive deck, but then the 6 mana mode isn't that interesting. I don't know.
Do
what
you
do you guys
support
think of this
black
card?
aggro in your cube, Jet?
I do, yeah. But like the black aggro, well, I guess the black aggro two-drop slot is very interesting because I think some people think that it's not that stacked. I personally think that it's very stacked because of the Mesmeric Fiend effects, which I really, really love. The effects that take cards out of your opponent's hand. I think those are quite good. And so at least for me, this really didn't have any contention as a black aggro card.
I was very high on this card, and I ranked it fairly highly. I've talked about my conflicted relationship with black aggro on the show before. It's something I've tried to support over the years, and it's constantly broken my heart, and I'm going to keep working on it. I think this particular set gave us a lot of really good cards for it, so I feel like it's going to get pretty substantially overhauled when I make my changes for the set. And here, this to me, I don't think really belongs outside of aggro unless you have some very specific weird synergies that you're doing. But in an aggro deck, this is a perfect example of a 2-mana 2/1 with Menace and lifelink, who cares? The lifelink is not really relevant here. A 2-mana 2/1 with Menace is already just a very good stat line. I have played Glint Sleeve Siphoner over the years and thought that was a fine card. And the gravy you get of just drawing this late or when you're flooded out and then turning it into this and your best creature has already died, I think is a high ceiling. And it's another example of is either mode that exciting? No. 2-mana 2/1 with Menace, not great. A 6-mana 2/1 with Menace and the best card in your graveyard, which if you're an aggro deck is not going to be an incredible card. You're not going to get back Grizzlebrand or whatever. But again, the modality for me is just something I rate very highly. And oftentimes we have to pay a price for that modality where both modes are quite bad or really overcosted. And in the case of Null Priest of Oblivion or Blood Chief's Thirst, the price is very small. Really the biggest downside on Blood Chief's Thirst is that it's sorcery speed, which is a bummer, but it is what it is. And then Null Priest of Oblivion, the baseline of a 2-mana 2/1 Menace is basically what the Glint Sleeve Siphoner was that I was playing for years. So yeah, I'm pretty high on it. I think it's very good.
Yeah, I think actually to me this is a card I think in higher power level cubes, you have to evaluate as an aggro card. And so you ask yourself, does this fit in my black aggro section if you choose to support it? But I actually think where this card shines and probably why a number of people are testing it is sort of like your lower powered cubes where mid-range is a better strategy than it tends to be at higher powered cubes. Because I actually think this is a very good mid-range card, right? Like you can play it early. It's good interaction for aggressive decks. It can pressure control decks, but then, in the mid to late game, like it actually becomes a very good value card.
That's true, actually. I think you're right about that. I'm very excited to play this in green-black in my own cube or whatever, for example. And just, like you said, if you're against an aggro opponent, then the lifelink does matter, and you just play it out as a, 2-mana removal spell that gains you 2 life for whatever creature's attacking. And then late in the game, you can get back something actually valuable. Yeah. All right, I want to talk more modal double-face cards, unless people are going to tell me I'm not allowed to.
Well, I think maybe it would be useful to sort of like at least blitz through the remaining normal cards.
Sure.
I don't know. What do you think? I like one.
Do a speed run.
Okay. So like one card I think is pretty interesting is Nighthawk Scavenger, right? Which is a card that I think would have ranked much, much higher if you had given this survey out 2 to 3 years ago, right? Like when most of us were still cubing Vampire Nighthawk. And this card is like mostly a strictly better Vampire Nighthawk, but 51% of unrestricted cubers are cubing it, and it gets a rating of 2.1. And I don't know. I'm interested to see how this card performs. I am testing it, but I'm not sure if it's going to be like that much better than Vampire Nighthawk. Like it is obviously better, but
this is a card I was not interested in personally. The difference between 2 and 3 mana is just it's a canyon. There's so much that I need a 3 mana card to do that I don't need a 2 mana card to do. And for me, a 3 mana card that doesn't disrupt my opponent, doesn't line up well against removal, and is basically just kind of a strong, attacking creature. It's just a body. Is not really where I want my 3 drops to be. And I wonder how much they have to push cards that were just a body at 3 mana before I'd be really excited about them.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of discussion, right? Like I think if this card doesn't do that well in my own cube, like it might be the death knell for Baneslayers as a card type, which is its own discussion. But I agree with you. I'm not actually sure how well this card will do, given that it doesn't get you any immediate value.
Speedrun, Jet. Speedrun.
Speedrun. Okay, so like 2 more cards that I would like to talk about in this group, and one card I think is being overrated, and one card I think is being underrated. Okay, so the card I think is being underrated is Skyclave Apparition. So only 35% of cubers are testing this card, right? This is like the 3 mana card that 1 white when it comes into play, you get to exile something for CMC 4 or less, and then if it leaves the battlefield, the owner of that card gets a token with CMC equal to the card that you exiled. It only has a rating of 2.1, and I gave this card like a pretty high rating. I think I rated it at like 2.8. I just think that removal on a body is so good, particularly in cubes that are cubing a lot of planeswalkers. The fact that this can interact with early planeswalkers with a body, just like, in my opinion, makes it so good.
How do you compare this to just a Banisher Priest? Which, this is almost a Banisher Priest, right? 3 mana for a 2/2. The difference here is that we are limiting the thing you can exile. You can't exile something with CMC 5 or greater. And instead of them getting the thing back when it leaves the battlefield, they instead get the XX token, where X is the CMC of the exile card.
I think, at least in my own cube, it's significantly better. Mostly because I cube a lot of cheap planeswalkers. And being able to interact with those planeswalkers while still keeping board parity, I think is really, really important. I also think it is unfortunate that if they remove this at instant speed in combat, like you get absolutely destroyed. But I think that the payoff is definitely there, and I'm surprised to see it do so poorly, both in terms of the number of people testing it and in its rating.
This is a card type I have not talked about much, but I originally ran a fair number of these kind of Banisher Priest style cards where it's a creature that enters the battlefield and has something it removes, and then if the creature goes away, the thing comes back. And there are all kinds of variations of that, right? Like I consider Sower of Temptation to be a kind of variation of that. The Mesmeric Fiends are also kind of a variation of that. And without accepting the Mesmeric Fiends and the Brain Maggots for a second, I ended up cutting pretty much all of these cards from my cube because I found them to be just extremely swingy. It wasn't that they were not good, right? Because sometimes Banisher Priest is, a 2/2 with the Vindicate attached to it because they never get to kill the creature, and then you just got to, exile whatever you wanted, and you got a 2/2 for just 3 mana, and that's a huge swing in your favor. And on the flip side, though, sometimes your 3 mana investment is undone by, a shock or a disfigure at instant speed when they get that thing back in a moment where they can really capitalize on it, and it's a blowout in the other direction. And so I feel like I avoid these not for power level reasons, but just because of gameplay reasons. I feel like what they do is they create these very high tension moments where now the whole game revolves around whether or not this thing sticks or doesn't. And, if you run a lot of removal, then Banisher Priest looks pretty bad because it doesn't stick very often. If you don't run that much removal, then it looks really good because it's just really strong. And that kind of like very polarizing gameplay where it's either amazing or terrible is just something that I've been trying to avoid. And so I didn't really look twice at this card for that reason. I just not interested in playing a 2/2 that just dies and I get blown out by any kind of removal spell. But I understand why people are interested in it. And I'm not surprised by its ranking, though. I think it's probably a little better than Banisher Priest, but I don't get the sense that there's that many people still playing Banisher Priest.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think you've just talked me into it.
Yes.
Tell me why.
I did not submit this, but I do like those Banisher Priest type cards for all of the same reasons you just described. It is a little bit more high variance, but it's fun on the opposite side of that interaction.
Oh, it's really fun to ruin your opponent by shocking a Skyclave apparition. That is very fun. I agree.
Yeah, I think, I agree that the card is incredibly swingy. I view it mostly in my environment as a solution to another sort of swingy card, which is Planeswalkers, right? Like, the fact that the game revolves around removing these, now, at this point, 3 and 4 mana Planeswalkers, and needing to be able to do so in a way that keeps you up in tempo and card advantage, I think is super, super important. And so I think if I was not cubing an excessive number of Planeswalkers, I would probably not cube this card, which is also why I don't cube Banisher Priest effects.
I will say it is somewhat high variance, but I think there's also just a lot of interesting interplay where going into combat, you have to think about the risk that you're taking on if you have a Banisher Priest or a Skyclave apparition in play. And I think that sort of tension is a net positive.
Yeah, that was the other reason I ended up not liking the cards, though, because I felt like oftentimes I was quote-unquote getting a creature, but it was a creature I very rarely could actually use in combat because I couldn't afford to lose it. And so it was actually just a more fragile, Banishing Light or whatever. And honestly, I don't even really like Banishing Lights for the same reason, because it's just like, do you have a disenchant? If so, this was a horrible play for me. And if you don't, then this is an incredible play for me. But, different strokes. That's why it's beautiful that we all have our own takes on this incredible game.
Yeah, I think that if we compared our two cubes and the philosophies behind how we've designed them, that's a big part of it, where you pretty much go into combat knowing what's happening in your cube. And in mine, there's a lot more variation that can happen during combat.
That is true. All right, what was the underrated card? Oh, that was the underrated card. What was the overrated card, Jet?
I think the overrated card is Seagate Stormcaller, right? So this is the one in the blue for, I think it's a 2/1. That when it comes into play, right, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast with CMC 2 or less gets copied. I think this card is not very good. I think for a variety of different reasons. So essentially, 43% of users ended up testing this, and it's rated at a 2.1. So actually about the same as Skyclave Apparition, but I think it's significantly worse. I think a lot of people think about, I get to copy my Ponder, I get to copy my Doomblade and kill 2 different things. But I'm curious, how often you'll have those cards and, not have already needed to cast them, right? Casting your Doomblade on turn 4 is if you're playing an aggressive deck, that's a real cost.
I was initially pretty low on this too. It was drawing comparisons to Snapcaster Mage, which I think it is definitely not. And I think that people were kind of excited about it because it's a splashy mythic and it has the potential of copying spells. People love copying stuff. And my initial evaluation of it was that it was not super great. I didn't even include it in my testing list, I'm pretty sure. But this is an early contender for the card that I think I may have underrated after actually playing with and against it, because when I've had this played against me, it has felt very bad. And I was playing against an opponent in a cube, and the line that happened, I think, twice across our 3-game match was just, turn 3, Seagate Stormcaller into Thoughtseize. And it was like, oof. like now you get a 2/1 and I'm down 2 cards, and it just feels really, really awful. And it's definitely it requires more setup than something like Snapcaster Mage, which only asks that you have instants and sorceries in your deck, and at some point you will get to sort of flash them back as the game goes on. Here you do have to consider how you use the resources, but, similarly to how I think people maybe underrate modal cards and I perhaps overrate them, I think I often underrate copying abilities because I am so focused on making sure my cards are never dead. And I'm just if Seagate Stormcaller is good, why would I not just run a second, Thoughtseize variant? And then I just have 2 of those cards, and that seems good to me. And the inherent flexibility of the copying cards like Snapcaster Mage or Seagate Stormcaller is that you obviously get to copy whatever is most relevant at that moment. So, if you really need to find more cards, you can copy a Ponder. Or if you really need to, attack their hand because, they're a control deck that's, slow and going to grind you out with valuable card draw or Planeswalkers, then you can double Thoughtseize them. And if you're playing against aggro, then you can double Lightning Bolt their threats. And, it's actually probably worth waiting until turn 3 to do that because, you get this kind of 3-for-1 at that point where now you're going to block something with a 2-1 and get more value out of it. And so I think this is a category of cards that I often underrate because I'm so afraid of not having, the stars align and getting full value. But the ceiling on this, I think, is really high. And if you have a lot of instant sorceries in your deck, especially cheap ones, because it has to be cheap here, the chances that you can line it up, I think, are not as rare to come by as I thought they initially were.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm underrating this. I think you might have convinced me to actually test this card. I think obviously
I'm thinking about it now too, honestly, after playing against it, and it was not something that was on my radar, but it felt bad. It felt really bad to have it cast against me every time.
All right. I also think that, this card is obviously a shoe in Empowered Cubes. The ability to copy Ancestral Recall or Time Walk just puts this card over the top.
Yes, I imagine if you like playing those cards, then playing 2 copies of them would be great.
I do wonder, what percentage of games you will win more by copying your Ancestral Recall than, compared to just casting Ancestral Recall, but, I mean, it is very good.
It feels much cooler to cast 2 of them, though. All right, can we talk about more double-face cards now, please?
Yes, go ahead.
I love talking about them. All right, so we talked a little bit about how I was surprised that especially the Mythic ones weren't, kind of off the charts. And I do want to acknowledge a couple of reasons that make sense to me for why these cards are not maybe being tested by more people. One of them is something we've talked about before, which is just that I know some players are just opposed to the practical ramifications of double face cards. The idea that their players during a draft will have to unsleeve them to flip them over, or might be drafting and not know what the backside does, and therefore have to either expose information of what's in their pack to the table by flipping the card over, or just pretend they know what it is and actually draft without perfect information. And that's a very reasonable thing. If that's something that bugs you and you don't want players touching your cards, then that makes sense to me. The other thing I'll say that makes sense to me, which is actually not a criticism I've heard very often, but I wonder if this is what people that have complained about them being, quote unquote free or too good in all of the decks actually mean. And that is this idea that some players do not like a card like Winds of Abandon, because Winds of Abandon is another 2-mana exile spell. It's like a 2-mana Path to Exile at sorcery speed, or you could overload it for 6 mana and it becomes a Plague Wind Path to Exile. It exiles all of your opponent's creatures and gives them a land for each one. And I've heard arguments against this card for basically being kind of unfair, right? That you as an aggro deck get to sometimes run a board wipe. And, your aggro deck should never have a board wipe in it because that doesn't belong in an aggro deck. That's not what aggro does. But because it's attached to a spell that you're going to cast the front end of 90% of the time, now the fact that you get to have this overloaded version of the spell, and in the mid-range mirror, or your mid-range matchup or against the aggro mirror, you get to completely wipe their board, is just... It's like cheating almost, and people don't like that sort of aspect of a deck building. And so that argument that you don't want your aggro opponent to flood out and then all of a sudden cast a 7-mana sorcery and make 2/4/4 angels, you think that's cheap or not skillful. I can understand that argument at least, but I don't understand any argument that basically makes the case that they're not actually good, especially the Mythic ones, because that flexibility of being a land, even 90% of the time and then 10% of the time being a total bomb game-winning spell that might have just otherwise been a mountain in your deck, feels like it's really, really powerful to me.
Yeah, I think that, I obviously agree with what you said. I think there is some sense that you're doing really well as a mono white deck against your mid-range opponent or something, and then they just absolutely destroy you with a Shatter Skull Smashing for X=2. And that's kind of unfair. That should have been a basic mountain. I definitely understand that opinion.
So maybe that's how people are kind of processing this, but yeah. And the last kind of argument, which people have worded to me as quote unquote these cards not being worth a slot in their cube. That one to me, I think, just comes down to, I understand some people they feel like playing a card in their cube that will most of the time be played as a land, and these Mythic double face cards are very expensive on the spell side, all of them. So they truthfully are mostly going to be played as a land. And I think people don't like the idea of using up a precious slot in their cube on a card that will mostly just be a worse mountain or a worse swamp or whatever, even though the 10% of the time it's not that. It will have a huge impact on the game and be, very impactful. I do kind of understand the I just don't want to run cards that are mostly lands and sometimes really good. But still, given these things that I understand, I'm still a little bit surprised they weren't ranked higher.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as a player, if you offer me the choice to play more and more modal and like flexible cards that can do different things at different point in the game, obviously those are great cards and I want to put more of them in my deck. But I think as a cube designer, I don't want to put that many of those into a cube, because then just everybody can do everything all the time. Like it doesn't then ask you to commit to strategies and commit to lines of play, which I think is an important part of the game.
So, Anthony, I think you've played the most Zendikar Rising proper of the three of us, and I wonder how you feel about the environment, because obviously this is an environment where there's lots of double-face cards running around, and you could make the argument that this is an environment that is leaning really hard into that, like, minimizing variance. And do you feel like it is... How have you enjoyed the format, basically, the regular draft format?
So I haven't played as much as I'd like to. Obviously, if we could still be doing drafts in paper, I would have played a lot more. But yeah, I mean, there are so many cards that do this, like especially just like the common double face land cards mean that you end up playing a ton of lands. You never get flooded. You never get screwed. I still do, of course, but no one else does.
My opponents never do.
And
jerks.
I think that in a lot of ways that is a positive, because you just get to play a lot of games of Magic that feel like real games of Magic. On the other hand, though, it does mean that there are a lot of cards that just end up not seeing play, because like the floor on so many of these cards has been raised up so high that you're never really trying to struggle and figure out, like, well, what's my 23rd card going to be? And similar to what we talked about with the conversation that BDM had on limited resources, that is actually a very valuable tension. I think that tension is not really here in this format. And that's not necessarily a net negative. Like, again, the fact that you get to play more games that are real games is definitely a positive. But I think it is something that is present and is valuable to think about and be aware of.
I have not played as much as you, but I have really liked the games of Zendikar I've played. I had a game last night where I drew my modal double face card. It was the stupid cleric, the 1/3 that gains 2 life, or a tap plains. Super late in the game on like turn 9 or whatever. But I just played it as a land because I had a Fearless Fledgling, and I was like, you know what? Like, I don't need this body right now. What I actually need is another +1/+1 counter on my little Griffin. And I don't know. I feel like I have really enjoyed the fact that variance is somewhat minimized, and I have not had games that have been just total mana flood or mana screw as often, and I get to make decisions like that where you would think that maybe this is kind of a no-brainer, like of course you cast a spell late in the game, but that's not always, like you could draw your metal double face card in cube really late and decide that you're only out here as upheaval, and you're going to play it as a land because you want to draw upheaval in the next turn and have another mana in play, and that could be how you end up processing these cards. So I don't know, I have not felt that I feel like they have, if anything, just really expanded the decision points rather than minimizing them and making the game sort of more sort of predictable in how it plays out.
So the cards that I do really like that interact with these are the cards that return lands to play. There's the 3-mana 2/2 flyer and a big green guy.
Kazim Raptor and the green one. I can't remember.
And the green one. And I like that they actually interact with this mechanic and like allow you to play something as a land early and then pick it up when the spell side is relevant. But when you don't have those kinds of things that actually interact mechanically, it does feel a lot of times it's just like, well, I'm just going to take these highly and jam them in my deck, and it's just kind of a free thing to do.
Well, actually, ironically, that ended up happening to me in a cube draft a few days ago. My control opponent ventured at the end of turn, and I was like, oh, okay, you're just going to bounce my, my mid-range green threat. And they're like, no, I'm actually going to return this Emiria's Call, and then I lost the game.
Oh, so your mistake for playing mid-range green. Jet, you're supposed to play mono red. They would have been dead before they could venture their own Emiria's Call and cast it against you.
Yeah.
Now, the other double-face cards. We've talked a lot about the mythics. We haven't actually really addressed any of the enter the battlefield tapped strictly double-face cards. And my processing of this has changed since we last talked about it. Anthony and I did a show about this early on where we kind of dove deep on what we thought about this mechanic, and we were trying to unpack why some of the cards felt really good and felt like they were sort of the best possible version of that kind of modal card. And while some of them, we really just wish it had cycling instead of the option to come into play tapped as a land. And for me, I have kind of come down on the side that I really want the non-mythic double-face cards, the ones that always come into play tap, which is the thing I'd avoid as much as possible in my cube, because there's no worse feeling to me than needing to draw your 4th land for a board wipe to survive, and then you draw a tapped land. Like, that's just peak tilt, peak salt. So I really avoid the tap lands, and the ones I'm actually interested in testing and playing are the ones that are very good in the late game. And the cards that are not very good in the late game, whether that's Tangled Florahedron, whether that's the 1/3 that enters the battlefield and gains 2 life, those cards, while I still think they're good, they are not going to be worth the tap land for me, I don't think, because the value of these modal cards is that they are good at many points in the game by virtue of their modes. And when you look at a Tangled Florahedron or the Skyclave Cleric, those cards are good early. Skyclave Cleric is a little more matchup dependent. It's really good against aggressive decks and not as good against, a control deck or whatever. But they're still they don't do much late. And so you get some extra modality early. Maybe you have a hand that you couldn't keep if your Tangled Florahedron was a forest, but now you can keep it or whatever. But I'm just not as into those cards as I am into the ones that have some kind of significant late game impact, like the murder spell, Hagra Mauling. That's a card I'm very excited about. I'm really into the Mammoth, which is just a card that doesn't really have any, we're not really paying anything for the modality, because the 3-mana 3/3 with landfall become a 5/5 till end of turn is already basically fringe playable depending on what your green section looks like, and the fact that it can also be a land is really just gravy. Those are the cards I'm excited about. I'm not as into the other modal double face cards that don't have sort of really impactful late game value.
I will say, though, that flexibility is still more valuable than it might look at first, having played with some of these cards. So, if you look at McKindy's Stampede and Song Mad Treachery, they obviously are good in extremely situational, parts of the game. And so it's easy to see, this is going to be relevant a lot of time because the two modes are so different. And something like Tangled Florahedron, it looks like there's a lot less flexibility because the two modes are still good in relatively similar parts of the game, but still just widening that bell curve of the conditions that make that card useful still does make it a good deal more powerful.
So Andy, I have a question for you. I agree with everything you just said, Anthony. I think that the increased flexibility really at any point in the game makes these cards better than they might ordinarily appear. Andy, I know you were really high on Jwari Disruption, pretty early on. So has your opinion of that card decreased?
It has, yeah. That's actually, I kind of saved that for the last one because that's the card that if I could go back and change my scores for the survey, this is the one I would want to amend and pretend like I wasn't as high on. After thinking about it more, playing with some of these modal double face cards, playing specifically with Jwari Disruption, I think it is a significant amount worse than Censor for all the reasons I mentioned. It is a card that early on you either want your land when you need a land, or you want a cheap counterspell that will punish them for trying to curve out. And there are situations where Jwari Disruption is valuable late, but I think the cycling on Censor makes it just so much more appealing than Disruption, because Censor is almost always useful early, because in the first 4 or 5 turns of the game, you can almost always find a situation where your opponent is tapped out and you can really get full value off of that counterspell. And then late game, you get to decide. Is my opponent playing cards that I know are X spells, or that I know he has really expensive stuff? They're playing Upheaval. I guess Upheaval is not a great example because they can usually just pay the one and make their post Upheaval not quite as powerful. But you can, based on all the information you have about how the game is played in your opponent's deck, you get to decide if Censor is valuable. Disruption, you just have to basically sit and hope. And maybe there'll be situations where you have to decide if you're going to play the land because you think you're going to draw your lone 7-drop, or whether you're going to hold on to it because you think there's a higher likelihood of them actually tapping out. But yeah, I'm much lower on Disruption than I initially was, and I'm not even sure I'm going to test it anymore. We'll see.
Wow, that's kind of surprising. I think I was initially pretty low on it, and my opinion has come up, but I guess I'll evaluate it more.
The truth is, none of us know what Magic cards do or how good they are, and that's the joy of the game. It's a very difficult game to play.
Yeah, so at least with respect to the Cube community survey, the way they're thinking about these non-mythic double face cards, they do rate significantly lower than the mythic ones, obviously, and they all have ratings about 2 to 2.2. And so the cards, at least that fall in this range, are the Balaged Restoration, which is the instant speed regrowth, which has actually impressed me a little bit in Standard from what I've seen, so I might actually end up testing that card. Jwari Disruption, which we just talked about. Hagra Mauling, which is the murder. I actually don't know how I feel about this card. It has been...
Oh, that one I'm into.
Fine. It's been fine when we've tested it. I mean, I guess that's sort of the point, right? it's hard for me to put myself in that mindset of if that had been a basic swap, would my opponent have won the game more? No, of course,
right.
But they're hard to evaluate in that sense. And then Tangled Florahedron and then Glasspool Mimic are the other two cards that fall in this range. Kazandu Mammoth is the one that is the highest rated non-mythic one, and it actually rates pretty close to the mythics. And I think a lot of people recognize that the front half of this card is actually a pretty good floor.
I actually mentioned earlier that I wasn't super high on 3-drops that don't disrupt your opponent or just die to removal, and the Mammoth is that, except it's also a land. But I wonder if people playing Mammoth, because of the double face card nature of it, is going to result in them being more happy to just play, generic beef at 3 mana in green, which there's, a movement amongst some cube designers to, play a more, aggressive kind of racing green strategy that's actually like pure mid-range instead of like giant ramp spells. And there's some people that just still maintain that, like, your 3 mana slot is kind of useless in green. It's just for your Courser of Krufix and maybe some other ramp spells, and then you're just trying to get to 6 and 7 mana. And I wonder if people playing the Mammoth, because of the sort of flexibility, will realize that, oh, you know what, actually, I really like just having a 3 mana 5/5 in my green deck. Like, that's pretty good. And then start, like, branching out into the other more generic, threats at 3 mana.
Yeah, I mean, I think green is definitely a little bit of an interesting beast, wherein 3 mana vanilla threats are a lot better on turn 2 than they are on turn 3.
There is one other like small category of cards I'm interested in talking about if people don't have anything else, which is we've talked a lot about the cards that have like rated pretty highly, and I'm actually interested always in these perspectives and looking at the cards that people are still testing but are ranking lowly, because those are the cards that I think are interesting to me, in that people are like, you know what, this might have a chance of being good, but I really don't think it is, but I'm still going to test it because I'm curious. And there's a standout here. The lowest rated card in our survey, again, based on our threshold of, at least 6 cube designers, or at least 5 cube designers, is Archpriest of Iona, which has 12 testers, which is not insignificant, and is only rated 1.5. And this is a group of people that I guess are just hoping maybe they can get to a full party somehow randomly in their white aggro decks. And even though they know in their heart of hearts that that's probably not likely to happen, so they're rating it lowly, but they're maybe going to try it out to see how it goes.
Yeah, I think when I was looking at this card, I was initially very excited because I'm an aggro player at heart, and so whenever I see a 1-drop, I'm like, oh, good. I like evaluating those cards. I think I was excited on this because I thought to myself, oh, it's pretty likely that you'll have another warrior in play because you're an aggro deck. Turns out that a lot of cheap white creatures are actually soldiers, not warriors. And so it doesn't actually count towards party, which I think definitely dampened my excitement for this card.
I think the party mechanic overall is like a very cool implementation of a tribal mechanic, and obviously also very flavorful. I feel like the trap that tribal mechanics can fall into is that you just want to get this like absolute density of some type of card. So you end up just being like, I'm the Merfolk deck, I'm just going to draft every single Merfolk, and your draft is kind of on rails. Whereas the party mechanic, it really asks you to like collect different kinds of cards and also just meet a threshold. So you still have a lot of flexibility in how you're building your deck. But despite that, I think it really imposes a huge challenge to Cube specifically, because we're not building a standard set. We can't design all the other mechanics and then at the end of the design phase say like, okay, let's like balance the party mechanic, like make this a warrior, make this a cleric, and like make these beasts so we can balance it. Instead, we're sort of taking all these cards that exist and we just don't have the flexibility. Like you can say, well, I want, my Thalia's here, but then let's just change the creature type so that we can make party work. We don't have that luxury. So for that reason, it's not surprising that it's so low. And also not totally surprising that a few people are testing it, because it is a powerful creature that looks pretty appealing.
I think there's also a subset of people that they'll test really any potentially viable aggro 1-drop that is not a boring Savannah Lions or whatever, which I understand that inclination. So I see you down here, 12 people that are like, maybe this is one that will work, but you actually know it's probably not going to work, but you really would like it if it did. I get it. I feel you. Yeah, the other card that is kind of in this category for me is Soul Shatter, which is one I did want to touch on. This is the instant that makes your opponent sacrifice the creature or planeswalker with the highest CMC among creatures and planeswalkers they control. This is a card I don't quite know how to evaluate, and it seems like people are also kind of in a similar boat. This has 22 testers, which is not a super high number. I am among those 22, and the average rating is a 1.8, which is quite low. It's in the bottom quartile of all the cards that we survey people on.
When I read this card, I just imagined my opponent playing an Elspeth Knight Errant and plussing it, and then my Soul Shatter becomes a dead card.
I totally agree. I feel like it's a powerful card and it will often do what you want it to do, but when it doesn't, it's going to feel very bad. And so for me, that just means it's like it's not better than Murder in terms of how much fun it's going to be to play.
Wait, why does Elspeth Knight Errant plussing make Soul Shatter a dead card?
Well, I guess if you're leaving up Soul Shatter when they play it, but if you draw Soul Shatter later, they're just going to sacrifice the token, right? Oh, no, because they have to...
I don't think they can. They have to sacrifice the thing with the highest CMC among those two types.
Okay,
right?
Actually, I completely misread this card. I apologize. All right, yeah, it's better than I thought.
So, but yeah, I mean, like, it is going to do what you need it to do the majority of the time. But that time that, your opponent has an Oko out and then plays a 4/4, you're just going to be out of luck.
It's going to feel bad when you can't make them sacrifice their giant Stonecoil Serpent or whatever. And
Right.
I don't think I need more 3-mana removal spells. I rated this really low. This was among my skeptical inclusions. I was like, maybe I'm wrong about this, but for the percentage of time it will miss, I don't think it's going to be worth it for me. But here's something else I have to acknowledge. I have emotional responses to cards, and the illustration that Wiley Eckert, or what's his full name here? Wiley
Beckett?
Wiley Eckett. The illustration on this card is just so beautiful, and it sparks joy.
Yeah.
I love it. And like, compare that to something like Kargan Intimidator, which I know to be a good card that I should probably find some room for, but I just do not like the stupid illustration. Sorry, illustrator, nothing personal. It's just I don't like it. It does not spark joy. The composition is not inspiring me. So that's the thing I have to always be aware of, because it is in my head that I'm like, ooh, this card, I want it. I want to touch it and put it in my cube. And it's maybe not actually good enough.
It looks like he's holding a chainsaw, though, Andy. Isn't that exciting?
I don't like when semi-technology appears in Magic. I still really don't like the stupid cars in Kaladesh. I can get on a stupid, trivial soapbox about those things. Not my favorite.
Yeah, I think for me, like, if Skyclave Shade, if the promo didn't have such beautiful art, I probably would have given it a lower rating. If I'm being perfectly honest with myself, like, it does matter.
I think anybody that says they are completely unaffected by that is lying a little bit. I think all of these things are factors. It's just how much of a factor is it for you?
Yeah, like one thing that often comes up with the way that I think about things is Nature's Chant, right? Which is the strictly better disenchant. Feels like a less exciting card to me because I have an old bordered foil disenchant.
Right. It's not as pretty.
It's not.
All right, Wizards, can we get Wiley Beckett to illustrate some better cube cards?
Yeah, please. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's do I have a long list of cards I would love to have foils printed, even just tokens that I would love to have, Wiley Beckett illustrate. Give us a call. We'll help you out. They need our help, I think. We're going to provide the valuable service.
Definitely. The Cube community, I'm sure, drives a lot of Wizards' design choices and art choices.
Absolutely. You know what? This is a hot take we can maybe dive into another time. I'm actually kind of glad that the Cube community does not dictate more of what Wizards prints and doesn't print.
Seems like you're drawing some connections to EDH there.
No, yeah, that's you, buddy. I didn't say anything. Okay, you're the one that's over here making these projections. That's coming from you, not me.
Yeah. One card that I actually wanted to talk about in terms of cards that not that many people are testing and pretty lowly is Relic Robber. So this is like the kind of Goblin Rabblemaster card of the set. It's the 2 and a red for a haste 2/2. And when it deals combat damage, your opponent creates a token that deals 1 damage to them on their upkeeps. I think that the fact that this card is only being tested by 5 out of 171 unrestricted cubers is really just a demonstration of how tight the red 3-drop slot has become.
I don't think this is very... I think there's obviously some circumstances where this is better than a Goblin Rabblemaster. If you can get this creature through, right, like maybe you put a flying thing on it or whatever, then you don't have to worry about also getting those little tokens through that would also be attacking. Like maybe they only have 1/1 blockers and they can trade for all your goblins, but they can't trade for your 2/2. There are situations where it's better than, any of these typical Rabblmasters. A lot of times it is worse giving your opponent resources, even if they're very hard to take advantage of. They could have a sack outlet. They could have something that would make them a lot worse. So I think... I think that that slot is just very, very tight, because I do think this would be very much in consideration, for just replacing a Rabblemaster, depending on what your environment looks like and what your values are. But not many people have any room for it these days.
Yeah, I do think it's a very, very cool card that does the thing you want it to do in a very unique mechanical way, which I really, really enjoy. I could definitely see in some lower-powered cubes it being a real staple.
Yeah, I think it's a card that would have rated significantly higher a few years ago when we didn't have 4 other Rabblemaster variants that existed.
Yeah, I agree. You're always looking to the past, Jet. You're always like, if it were only 4 years ago, this card would rate differently. Do you have some sort of nostalgia for the past? There's something wrong with the present?
I just think it's really interesting. I started cubing 6 to 7 years ago, and I've sort of just looked at recent sets relative to older sets, and I think that this is potentially just a consequence of, power creep in Magic. But the amount of cards that I test from these newer sets is just so much larger than the ones that I test from older sets, which I find really interesting.
There was a little series there of sets where I got kind of exhausted. I was like, there are too many good new cards. I feel like I'm reinventing my cube every time a set comes out. This is around, basically kind of like, last year, I felt like this way about War of the Spark and Throne of Eldraine. These sets were and Modern Horizons, those 3 sets all had so many cards that were in consideration for me that I felt a little bit exhausted. And then I got to say, like, between like Ikoria and, I mean, honestly, Zendikar Rising, I'm not testing too many cards, and nothing compared to like Throne of Eldraine or War of the Spark or Modern Horizons. So I feel that, but I do think it's just that we've had some really good sets lately, and it's not actually like necessarily indicative of the overall arc of Magic, because we do still get sets like Ikoria or whatever, where it's like, there's a few things here I'll try out. Why not? But yeah, you can definitely get that sort of just exhaustion from too many things being tested.
Also, like, to me, with some sense of nostalgia, this is something that's hard for me to parse as a cube designer. When I like try to reflect on games that I had a really long time ago, like, there is a sense of nostalgia, and I can't tell if that was because I was super new to Cube and like every single deck I drafted was really fun and exciting, or like my Cube has actually changed such that the like gameplay itself is dynamically different. And so sometimes I reflect on that. Like, I think, at some point here in the future, I might take like a critical look at my Cube and ask myself, like, is the power level and gameplay like really what I want to be doing? I don't know. We'll see.
You got to cut Oko, Jet. Everyone's doing it. All the cool kids are cutting Oko. You got to do it too.
That has crossed my mind. I actually like first picked Oko in my Cube draft the other day, which is kind of a wild thing. Like, I do not very often first pick multicolored cards, but I think Oko is there. I mean, yeah, like, I personally am not a huge fan of Planeswalker gameplay, and so like, I think up to this point I've sort of just been like, yeah, okay, this is a good 4-mana Planeswalker, I guess I'll cube it, but like, maybe it's time for me to put my foot down.
Stand up for what you believe in.
I don't even know what I believe
Lucky
in.
Paper Radio. All right, should we wrap it up there? Does anybody have anything else they really want to touch on?
I had one other question. We have this very cool graph on the site, which everybody's going to get to see as soon as this article goes live. And we're graphing three things: the rating, number of people are testing each card, and also the standard deviation, so like how much consensus there is around a card. Is that a fair way to consider that?
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, I'm just curious, like, looking at this graph, what's the best way? Like, how do I get the most information from that standard deviation? So, like, it's sort of interesting that there are a couple cards that are pretty low ranking, but have very low standard deviation as well. So it's like, everybody kind of agrees this is kind of a middling card.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think is really valuable when you're looking at this graph?
Yeah, I think that in general, the consensus is probably less informative than, like, the number of people testing and then the ranking, but it does tell you whether or not a card, like how much the Cube community sort of agrees on it. One thing that I will say that is hard to appreciate from this graph is that if cards have very high and low average rankings, it is very difficult for them to have a high standard deviation as well, right? So like, for example, if a card has an average rating of 3, right, that means that everyone rated it a 3. And so its consensus by default is going to be very high. And so you actually kind of have to think about that a little bit. But there are some interesting cards, like, for instance, Phylath, the World Sculptor, has a very high consensus or a very low standard deviation, but everyone sort of rates it at a 2, right? And so maybe you look at this card, and like, if you believe that this card is insane at like a 3, maybe that's a result of your own Cube environment, but maybe it also means that like the majority of the Cube community disagrees with you.
So Phylath is just extremely medium.
That's what the Cube community thinks, yeah.
Yeah, I think for the people that are testing Phylath, well, there's not a big subset of our respondents. I think it's like, it fills a slot perfectly well. Like, if you're looking for, a 6-mana ramp payoff in red-green, it does the thing. And so it doesn't, like, blow anybody away. It's, like, arguably not any better than other things that can already do it 6 mana in red and green. So it's not going to be like a 3, but it will work. It'll end games. You will kill people with Phylath. It'll definitely happen. Yeah, I don't know. I think the actual graph of this data for this particular survey, I have to say, is not the most enlightening. I think we've definitely had surveys in the past where certain cards stand out and like very obviously like break trends or buck patterns, and here it's like all the high ranked cards people are like not super high on, and there's like a middling consensus. It's just like people are kind of disagreeing about whether it's a 2.5 or a 2 or a 3 or a 2.25, and so they're kind of this big cluster at the top here where it's like all the cards people are testing the most of, and then it kind of like bleeds off. And obviously the fewer testers, the more likely we are to get like extremes on the consensus, because if only 6 people are testing it, they might have all given it the exact same score just by chance or whatever. And once you have 100 people testing a card, it's very likely that you're going to have that much sort of consensus on the sort of ranking. And same goes for the sort of opposite of that. If you're only 2 people are testing a card, then you can actually have a 1 and a 3. And again, it's very hard to have 100 people testing a card with 51s and 53s. So there's some degree to which like that's kind of somewhat natural, but truly, like, I think the story of this set is that, the modal double face cards were contentious, that a lot of people just aren't testing them, and therefore, they're not showing up super high. And that means that we ended up with kind of just, run-of-the-mill cards that, nothing really stood out. There wasn't anything everyone could agree was incredible. And so we just have a bunch of cards, like the ones being tested by most people are just kind of like, yeah, this will probably be fine. This is like a little over a 2. It's a little better than average. But there really weren't any standouts one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. I also noticed that a card type that tends to do particularly well oftentimes in surveys are lands, particularly if they're just like very good in like windmill slams. People tend to think the pathways, which are the dual land slots for this set, only a subset of users are testing them, and they rate them at about a 2.4. But I think, for example, if these had been better and like a shoe-in in most cubes, they would have done extremely well.
That's a good example too, honestly. I think if they had printed all 10 pathway lands, we would have way more people testing them. That's my hot take.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
I think people like symmetrical cycles, and here we have an especially asymmetrical cycle, and that we got 6 of them, which is a weird number to get of them, and a weird combination of allied and enemy colored pairs. And I think a lot of people just can't find a room for them because they don't like 6 cards in random color pairs. And so, yeah, that plus the sort of aforementioned practical issues with the double face cards and actually flipping things over, I think is going to keep them from being super popular.
Do you want to talk about peasant or pauper cubes, though, or no?
If you have any observations that you think are worthwhile, by all means.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say that Blood Chief's Thirst in peasant cubes like rates significantly higher, obviously, because it's an incredible removal spell as an uncommon.
That's a little funny to me, though, because I also feel like most of the good removal spells we're playing in Cube are actually uncommon. Like, sure, like the ones that remove Planeswalkers tend to be rare, but, all your Doom Blades and all that kind of stuff like tend to be printed at uncommon or common. And so it feels like Peasant Cubes don't actually really have that much more limited access to good removal than unrestricted cubes do, and yet the Peasant Cubers ranked it more highly.
Yeah, that's fair.
We're going to wrap it up there. I have a lot of editing to do. It's a long episode, but that's fine. Thank you for listening to Lucky Paper Radio. We are going to have this perspective survey out for you sometime this week. The goal is Wednesday, and I'm saying it on air so that Jet has to get it done by then. we're making you sort of keen to it. So depending on when you're listening to this podcast, if you are listening, right when it comes out, then you can look forward to this perspective being available later this week. If you are listening to this episode later, the perspective is already out, and I will add it to the show notes when that does happen. So you can check out this article and these graphs and all this data for yourself and see how your evaluations compare with everybody else's. Jet, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully we can incorporate more of this in the future.
Yeah, happy to have you on the show whenever we have perspectives or whenever you have something else you want to talk about. This works out well. So,
yeah, that's why I pay you guys.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you, boss. Thank you, bird that owns.
Oh
the
man, I don't think I've
plant.
gotten my check yet, but I guess I'll just keep my eyes open.
Yeah, it's probably lost in the mail. There's some problems with the USPS right now. I'm sure the check's on its way.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you to DJ James Nasty for putting together all of our music for the show. Check him out online. And thank you, Anthony and Jeff, for talking about magic with me.
Always happy to talk about magic.